Where do the reports come from? Did you get an initial?
One PodVader.
That's football.
Every angle of the NFL covered.
All that kind of stuff, I get it.
This,
no question about it,
is Next Fan Up.
We're going to unleash hell here in December.
Hello and welcome to the Division Previews, provided to you by the Next Fan Up podcast. Hello, everybody. PodVader here, and we are previewing the NFC North today. Remember the North. Remember the North. The North always remembers. I'm sorry. I had to go there. It's been a while since Game of Thrones has been on TV, but it's always going to be in our pop culture mindset, won't it? Maybe not. Who knows? Always. You know, one guy who's always with me is our Eagle superfan, James. Hello, James.
Hey, Pod. Another division, another time for me to spew nonsense to the fans out there. Please email. I like when the emails come in and they rip something I've said. It's fun. It really is.
nextfanup@gmail.com is the way to get that done. At NFU Podcast on Twitter if you want to keep it short and simple and make it public, or facebook.com/NFU Podcast. A great way to keep the conversation going, create a conversation that we haven't even had on the podcast yet, and maybe we'll include it on the show. I can guarantee you we'll include it on the show. The teams of the NFC North. This is sort of, you know, when we talk about blue collar teams, the black and blue division, this is it. This is where these teams just hit you in the mouth, James. There's not a lot of finesse here. We're going to punch you in the face and then we're going to score a touchdown.
Yeah, and it's been that way for a number of years. And look, for the last decade or so, it's pretty much been Aaron Rodgers and his whooping boys, with the exception of about 2 seasons. I don't think that's going to change much this year, though.
Well, I'm a little down on this particular division as I'm looking over it. But at the same time, when I say I'm down on it, I don't have a lot of confidence in my picks for the teams this season in this particular division. Let me explain to everyone what I mean by that. As we've been doing these division previews, we're going over my own personal game-by-game predictions. I've gone over every game in the upcoming 2020 NFL schedule. I've picked winners and losers for every single game, and then I've provided the records for each of those teams. I've also this season introduced the concept of lock wins and lock losses. These are games that I feel super confident that a team is going to win no matter what, and also games that they're going to lose no matter what. And as I look at my beautifully colored spreadsheet, I don't see a lot of dark colored boxes for this particular division. And as a matter of fact, the team that I feel most confident about is in a negative fashion. Is that a surprise? Am I overly negative, James? No?
Okay. I mean, you can be on everyone outside of New England.
So we will start, as we have with all of our division previews, with the last place team, and that is your Detroit Lions. I've got them currently set at a 5-11 record with 3 lock losses. And that's why this is the team that I've said that I feel the most confident about, because they have the most locks in either fashion in this particular division, and they are all losses. A lock loss, week 4, home against the Saints, week 15 at the Titans, and week 16 hosting the Buccaneers. Listen, the rocket scientist, I think, has potential, and I think he can be a great head coach. But for whatever reason, he hasn't been able to put together a really good roster in Detroit. And the guys that he had that did have great talent didn't fit his scheme, or there was some sort of fallout, and they move on or get moved on. And I just don't see it here with Detroit.
Yeah. I mean, starting on offense, please help me out here, because outside of the head coach, I go blank on some of these teams' coordinators. Jim Bob Cooter's still the OC there in Detroit, right?
No, I actually think he got blown out. I'll look that up while you talk a little bit more about the Lions offense.
Yeah, because let's start at the head of this offense. Matthew Stafford, debilitating back injury last year that he suffered in the middle of the season, missed the last 6 or 7 games of the year, and quarterback play killed this team. I mean, it basically tanked their season. And look, the injury he had last year was something that, frankly, should have put him on IR immediately. And it was one of those things that if you listen to this show on a regular basis, we talked about it week in and week out. Why has he not been placed on injury reserve? It was the same back injury that Carson Wentz had the year before. Fractures in your vertebrae are nothing to laugh at. One wrong hit means you don't walk again. But he was hell-bent on trying to come back before the season ended. And even at the end of the season, when you think, okay, last week of the season, they're definitely going to put him on IR this weekend going into it, and they still didn't. Baffling as far as why they did that. I don't pretend to understand the inner workings of an organization, head coach, or training staff. I do know when something doesn't smell right, and that whole situation was just handled badly last year. If Stafford gets hurt again this year, expect to tank again because you've got Chase Daniel and David Blow as your backup quarterbacks. And I'm sorry, Detroit fans, there's not much hope in your quarterback room after Stafford. The rest of the offense, there's talent in Galladay, Jones, Amendola, TJ Hawkinson proved to be a bona fide stud at tight end when he was on the field. Jesse James figures in the mix there as well. It's a good receiving core all around. Running back, Kerryon Johnson looked like he was going to have a 1,000-yard season before injuries got, in his way. Bo Scarborough also got bit by the injury bug. They add DeAndre Swift. Maybe that helps this year. Hopefully it does. But this offensive line, it needs to play better, especially for if the passing game is still going to be Stafford standing behind center, waiting 5, 6, 7 seconds to throw a ball 15 to 20 yards downfield, the line has to do a better job of holding up. And they have to be more consistent in the running game as well. Projected right now, I'm looking at Decker as 1 tackle, Joe Dahl guard, Ragnow as your center, Jonah Jackson at right guard, and they add Halapoulivaati Vaitai at right tackle. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're a Detroit fan, I would be very, very worried about Halapoulivaati Vaitai. I speak from experience. The guy is a solid run blocker. If 80% of your playbook is to turn around, give the ball to the back, and let him run off right tackle, awesome job. Vaitai will pancake the defensive end, linebacker, tackle, whoever he's up against. He can, strangely enough, he can pull quite well. But when it comes to pass blocking, speed rushers who are able to get their shoulders down low, blow by him very quickly. He cannot move his feet. He can't get into position to absorb those speed rushers. And that's the book on him right now. Everyone in the league knows it. So you're going to see times in games where the opposition switches up their ends and removes the bull rush guy from his side, flips him to the other side, and brings a speed guy to that side just to turn him inside out. Because he is a revolving door for defensive ends. It's pretty much and it's not so much an Olay, it's, oh my gosh, I got one hand on him, and that's not enough because Stafford's going to get hit a lot.
By the way, people were screaming at their listening devices earlier. Yeah, Darrell Bevel is their offensive coordinator. He was their offensive coordinator all of last season, as a matter of fact. And just as a side note, Darrell Bevel was the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks when they decided to throw the ball on the goal line. And Matt Patricia was the defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots who intercepted said pass on the goal line.
Sounds like two geniuses there.
Matthew Stafford, I was worried about him last season, and it was more about the things going on off the field. His wife was recovering from brain cancer. I thought that was going to be a huge distraction for him, and it wasn't. And really what ended up happening was he unfortunately got injured and missed a good portion of the season there towards the end. I think people are expecting Matthew Stafford to come back strong. And I think Matthew Stafford, I mean, yes, quarterbacks are playing longer and later into their career and their lifespan. The GOAT is currently now in Tampa Bay at age 43. You mentioned Aaron Rodgers is old man Rodgers. He's now getting up there in age. Matthew Stafford, similar. But where some of these guys are maintaining there is sort of a decline. And I think Matthew Stafford is due for that decline. That said, you mentioned it before. Their wide receiving core is stout with talent. Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, Danny Amendola. They added Geronimo Allison and drafted Quintez Cephas in the 5th round. They definitely have a ton of talent in that wide receiver room. I'm not a big Jesse James believer at tight end. TJ Hawkinson was supposed to be the second coming of Rob Gronkowski, and he certainly did not live up to the hype last season. We'll see if TJ Hawkinson can take that second-year jump and actually show off some of the talent that he was hyped up for. And then
hopefully he doesn't jump too much, because jumping got him hurt last year.
There you go. And then on the running backs, Kerryon Johnson, I mean, people, especially Detroit fans, from what I'm hearing, have been so down on Kerryon Johnson, and their knock on him is that he just doesn't show the fire. They don't see enough desire out of him. And they even point to the fact that when he was asked about the Lions drafting DeAndre Swift in the 2nd round, how he felt about that, and his response was, I wasn't even watching the NFL draft. I was watching Harry Potter movies. And the fans went off on him. I'm like, wait a second. Why does he need to watch he's an NFL player. He doesn't need to watch the NFL draft. If he wants to get into Harry Potter in the offseason, who cares? But all of this is to the saying there's a lot of pressure on Kerryon Johnson to step it up. And if he doesn't, they've got a kid in DeAndre Swift that they believe in and could make some strides here for the offense. I mean, their offense, to me, there's a lot of talent there. They don't have a lot of excuses to not get things done.
Yeah, look, it'll still all fall on Stafford. I before the season started last year, I questioned whether this team can finally do something. He's been there a while. What's this, 10 years for him now, at least?
Something like that.
And they only have 2 playoff appearances. So, look, I get it's a tough division, but there should be more wild card showings for this team, with at least a couple of victories where you were just plucky or got lucky on the right day against the wrong team.
So,
I'm not seeing that there.
Yeah. And so the former Patriots defensive coordinator has brought in a lot of former Patriots on this defense. Trey Flowers at defensive end, Danny Shelton at defensive tackle, Jamie Collins at outside linebacker, Desmond Trufant. I'm sorry, not Desmond Trufant. They did bring in Desmond Trufant. Daron Harmon at strong safety from the New England Patriots. Justin Coleman, who is listed here as the nickelback from Seattle, started in New England. There are a ton of former New England Patriots on this defense, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be making a difference because the other guys don't seem to get whatever it is that the rocket scientist is trying to teach them to get it done. And that is part of the reason why Darius Slay is gone. But the other reason is perhaps from a budgetary standpoint, you move on from Darius Slay and you draft Jeff Okudah in the 1st round.
Yeah, and they did that twofold as far as filling his void, because, like you said, they acquired Desmond Trufant from Atlanta, which Falcons fans would tell you, thank you for taking that dead money off of our salary cap. Rookie corners, again, even if they're top 5, top 10 draft picks, we've already talked about they're either really good or they're really bad. There is no in between with them as far as their rookie season. It's either hard knocks and learning curves, or this guy's got it from day one. And it will show, because in this division, they're going up against a couple of quarterbacks who have some talent at wide receiver, and
they're going to test him.
He's going to be tested regularly when this defense is on the field. And yeah, this is Patricia's fourth year or third year going as a head coach of the Lions.
I believe this is third.
Look, this has got to be the year that, the genius of his scheme on defense has to show up some way, somehow. Yeah, he's got signature wins against the Patriots his rookie season, and, making things hard on this division as far as, even when they lose games, they still have a chance to win them more times than not. But this defense is pretty much, at best, it's leaky, and at worst, the dam breaks from the opening bell. And they don't get enough pressure on the quarterbacks. The linebackers oftentimes aren't where they're supposed to be to fill the gaps for the run game. And aside from Darius Slade, who they had last year, there wasn't much to talk about in the secondary. So, I mean, you can say they got more pieces than previous years, but the expectations are still there and they don't live up to them. This is another team that underachieves a lot.
And that's why when I'm looking at, I've got them at 5-11 this season, and I look at some of their losses at the Packers, division game on the road against a team that I think has a better roster, at the Cardinals. That's a game that the Lions could win. I think they have the talent to win, but I think the Cardinals are an up and coming team. And as I look at them as being sort of equal, I'm going to give the home team the advantage there. A lock loss against the Saints. You're not beating the Saints. At the Jaguars, again, they've got the talent and should beat the Jaguars, but they're on the road, and the Jaguars, being a team that's not going to contend in a lot of games, if there's a game that the Jaguars are going to steal, that's going to be, the Lions are going to be that team that I'm like, well, the Jaguars could most likely steal the game away from the Lions. At the Falcons, I think the Falcons are honestly a much better team than the Lions. But again, even if they were equal, it's an away game for the Lions. I'm going to take the Falcons. You're hosting the Colts. Again, I think the talent level of both teams fairly equal, but as you mentioned, the Lions are a team that likes to underachieve, not overachieve. At the Vikings division game, Texans, again, another game where you're hosting the Texans, equal game, but you tend to underachieve rather than overachieve. And that's sort of the way that I think the Lions will play out. And I think, unfortunately, that means it's the end of the Matt Patricia era in Detroit.
Yeah, and, that Texans game, put a big fat question mark on that one, because at that point in the season, Texans fans might be calling for Bill O'Brien's head.
Yeah, that's true, too. Let's not forget the Lions also making an ownership change of sorts. Old woman Ford. Sorry, I shouldn't refer to her.
Martha Ford.
Martha Ford
and her daughter
has stepped down, and her daughter is taking over as the owner, which leads to even more pressure, I think, on Matt Patricia to make sure that he actually performs. And as I see it, I don't think that's going to happen. Here's another. The unfortunate part about this is just to peel back the curtain for you all. I do have to kind of get moving, which means we have to go a little bit faster. And unfortunately, these teams require a lot of conversation, because now we move on to the second worst team in the division. And I think that's the Chicago Bears, whom I have at 6-10. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that think that the Bears will actually make a step forward this season and compete at a higher level. The question mark is going to be, how long of a leash does Mitch Trubisky have before Nick Foles takes over? Is there even a leash? Is it just, do we give the reins right to Nick Foles right off the bat?
Yeah, and that, I don't even think that's a question. Quiet as a kept, I think Nick Foles beats out Trubisky. If there's an open competition for the starting job, Foles beats out Trubisky. He knows the system that's in place. They have the talent on the offense. Montgomery and Cohen at backs, Robinson, Miller. They added Ted Ginn Jr. You have Riley Ridley.
Let's put a quick. Well, hold on. Let's pause before we move further, because Cohen and Montgomery at running back, sure, but they got to use them. They didn't. 2 years ago they did. Last season they did not.
No. So 2 years ago they had a guy named Howard in the backfield who they basically ran into the ground before they traded him to Philadelphia, and then they traded him to Philadelphia. And last year they bring in rookie David Montgomery. And like you said, they didn't run the ball last year. And every time Tariq Cohen was on the field, it was an obvious pass play because you're either trying to set up an end around, a gadget screen, something where Cohen hits the flat quickly because the receivers and tight ends are downfield blocking. Anything possible to try to either shorten the passing game for Mitch Trubisky or just get Cohen in space. And towards the end of the year, Cohen just didn't look like he was interested in playing football anymore. So, yes, there should be more running. Montgomery should have gotten more touches running the ball than he did last year, even though he was a rookie. And to say that running back is probably the easiest transition to make from college to pro. All the gap reads are pretty much the same. It's just being a tad bit more patient at the pro level than the college level. And, yes, they did not give him the ball last year. He should be a heavy part of the offense this year, especially if by some act of God, Trubisky is the starting quarterback day one.
And their offensive line is weak. Charles Leno Jr., left tackle, James Daniels, left guard, Cody Whitehair at center, Rashad Coward at right guard, Bobby Macy at right tackle, and you also have Jermaine Idafetti in there for some depth. Their offensive line does not give me a lot of confidence.
No, and again, this is one of those things where it's like your offensive line is pretty much has to be one of the strongest parts of your offense. You can't have all the skill, talent, and wonder why none of them can get the ball if your line's not doing this job as far as blocking, run or pass. And honestly, I don't know what the ceiling is for this offensive line, but they're pretty much at the floor right now on paper. And the only way to go from this line from day one is up because they can't go backwards any further. But a lot of that will have to do with the quarterback play. Nick Foles has a tendency to hold the ball too much. Trubisky is still young and doesn't look like he knows what he's doing in this offense, which he's had 2 years in. By the end of year two, he should look, if not comfortable, he should be able to spit out where everyone's supposed to be, like asking him what his name is. But there's too much talent at the skill positions between running back, wide receivers. They added Jimmy Graham. They drafted another tight end out of Notre Dame, Cole Kmet. There's too much talent on this offense for them to not at least fight for 8-8 at worst.
They have an extra tight end for sure. Cole Kmet, Jimmy Graham, as you mentioned, are the additions. Demetrius Harris is here, and Adam Shaheen is a guy that has some potential, and they have a number of other tight ends on this team as well. That they're all not going to make. One of the four that we've named is not going to be on this team, and
absolutely.
And in the wide receiving core, they added Ted Ginn Jr. To go along with Allen Robinson, Cordero Patterson, and Anthony Miller. I think the one thing that I can say positive about Ted Ginn, because he's not a star wide receiver, but he's always been a very good complementary wide receiver, and he's stayed healthy. And I think that's going to be the key, because honestly, that's the one part of the Bears wide receivers. They're never healthy.
Nah.
The defensive side of the ball, I mean, you have, arguably the best defensive player in the league in Khalil Mack. You have Akeem Hicks at defensive tackle, Eddie Goldman at nose tackle, Bilal Nichols at defensive end. There's a couple of other names on that defensive line, and John Jenkins and Abdullah Anderson that can contribute. The linebackers, we already mentioned Mack, Danny Trevathan coming in from Denver, Roquan Smith, their number one draft pick from 2 years ago. Robert Quinn from Dallas is now a part of this team. And you have depth
Mingo.
behind. You have a little bit of depth behind them, yes, with Iwuginabinwi and Barkevius Mingo. I mean, their front seven is definitely the strength of this team.
Absolutely. And that showed the day Khalil Mack, arrived in Chicago. Just think about his signing 2 years ago, that extension after the trade with the Raiders, and the fits they gave the Packers. Basically, in 2 straight season openers, the Packers used to just run all over the Bears. Now these games are pretty much 15-12 for the most part because Khalil Mack is there on defense. Defense is doing its job as far as I'm concerned for the most part. They just get put in a lot of bad situations, short field, constantly on the field too much because the offense is not helping, which you've already mentioned. And
the secondary, by the way, the secondary is strong too. Kyle Fuller, yeah. Buster Screen, Artie Burns, drafted Jalen Johnson in the 2nd round. Those are your corners. Eddie Jackson at safety, Deion Bush at safety. They have, listen, I've been playing this 32-team tournament with my son on Madden with the updated rosters. The Chicago Bears do not lose games because of their defense. They lose games because of that offense.
Offense, absolutely. And every game last year they lost because of the offense, whether it was time of possession game or just constantly turning the ball over. Every single game they lost last year could be attributed to that. I think back to the game they played against Philly, and it literally was a whole thing of 3 and outs for the offense, which gassed their defense. And in the second half of that game, Philadelphia was like, wait, we don't need to throw the ball so much. We just turn around and hand it off to recently acquired Jordan Howard, who had a field day on his former team last year, by the way, and Miles Sanders. And the two of them combined just pretty much ran all over the Bears for almost 200 yards of offense last season. That's only because the defense, they just kept giving the ball away. And that's something you just can't do. You can't put your defense in a hole possession after possession after possession. That's pretty much how you get dissension in the ranks amongst your locker room.
I have 0 lock wins, 0 lock losses for the Chicago Bears at 6-10. But if we're going to play the how long of the leash does Trubisky have game, weeks 1 through 5, I've got them going 1-4. So that is
really?
when
What's the one?
The one is the Giants at home in week 2.
Yeah, I think they found some way to screw that up. So 0-5.
So Trubisky gets pulled week 5. Foles comes in, and whoa, things look great. So from week 6 to week 10, 4-1, 4 victories, 1 loss. At Panthers, at Rams. Saints is the game that I've actually got them winning at home.
Oh,
that's one of those head scratchers, but then you go, oh, the Saints on the road playing outdoors first week in November. I'm going to give the Bears the advantage. The defense pulling off the victory there, losing on the road at the Titans, winning at home against the Vikings, and then the bye week, and then everything falls apart with the last part of their schedule, them going 1-5, winning their last game of the year against the Packers, but losing every other game before that. Right, exactly. So that's your Chicago Bears. Interesting that you say the Packers don't need it, because actually, if the Packers win that game, they would be tied for the best record in this division. I have the Packers at 9-7, coming in at second in the division. And again,
really,
here's the thing.
Okay.
I just don't trust Aaron Rodgers. I don't trust him. I can't. He comes in and he tells us to relax. And there's all that smoke last season about fighting with his new head coach and Matt LaFleur. And sure, they put on a good show last season, but I just don't feel it. There's a reason why the Packers drafted Jordan Love in the first round. And it's more than just we're preparing for the future, because they could have added a whole bunch of talent to help out Aaron Rodgers. And quite honestly, where they really didn't help him was the offensive line. David Bakhtiari at left tackle, sure. But then Lane Taylor at left guard, Corey Lindsey at center, Billy Turner at right guard, and Ricky Wagner at right tackle. I just don't see it. I don't see any improvement on that offensive line to give Aaron Rodgers any sort of time to get the ball to Devontae Adams, Alan Lazard, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Devin Funches, and Equanimeous St. Brown, the best name in the NFL.
Yeah, definitely the best named receiving core in the NFL as far as names go. But I feel like over the last 5 years, this offensive line, they pretty much try to stand pat as best as possible. And between injuries and age, they've gotten worse, which has affected Rodgers' performance. I'm serious. Like, I can't call anything else on this offensive line. This has been one of the more consistent offensive lines over the last 5 years as far as lineup goes. But whose name am I forgetting right now? Because we talked about him because he went to another team recently.
Bulaga.
Ryan Bulaga. Basically one of the most off-injured tackles in the league, along with Bakhtiari, which will always baffle me that by week 3, one or both of these guys has already missed a game. And then it's a head-scratcher and, wait and see for the next 13 weeks of the season to see which one of these guys is actually going to suit up, because when one suits up, the other doesn't because of some nagging lower leg injury. And it's kind of like, well, what did these guys do in the offseason? They make the playoffs, but they've pretty much been bounced in their first playoff game almost every, with the exception of last year, and the previous years before that. And that's if they make the playoffs, because they struggle mightily. Now, granted, I do like the running back combination of Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, provided both stay healthy. The line is good for run blocking. They actually rushed the ball more last year than probably the previous 4 years combined, which was shocking because they lean on Aaron Rodgers so much. To say Jordan Love was a head-scratching of a draft pick, not really, but like you've already mentioned, things are probably not as copacetic as Rodgers and LaFleur would have us believe, because honestly, I don't think LaFleur's system fits Rodgers' skill set. And Rodgers did everything possible to acquiesce. They tweaked some things in the middle of the season because an early loss to Philadelphia did not bode well in Green Bay. Trust me, I know they're still upset about that. But I could tell in that game when they were playing Philadelphia that there were just things, schemes, and the way that game played out for the offensive side of Green Bay that just didn't sit well, that were uncharacteristic for what this team is used to doing. And it did not take full advantage of Aaron Rodgers' skill set. So
I'm pretty sure I had Mercedes Lewis on a fantasy team in the 90s. They did not help him out in the tight end position. Richard Rodgers is gone, who was a good tight end that they let go. Jimmy Graham obviously no longer on the team, and Mercedes Lewis is a 14-year veteran, to be factual, not to be dramatic like I was. But
he's a good blocker, and he's where he's supposed to be.
And that's what it is. He's going to be a blocker. He doesn't have it. He does not have a weapon at tight end to throw to. Free Aaron Jones, your running back. They draft A.J. Dillon in the second round, and Jamal Williams is obviously still there. They've got talent with the running backs, but they got to use them. And they didn't last season, at least not for enough. Like I said, I don't trust Aaron Rodgers. I don't trust the offense of the Green Bay Packers, which is why I've got them as not the best team in the division. We move to the defensive side of the ball. Their front seven is a little weak, especially on the line. Dean Lowry, Kenny Clark, Tyler Lancaster. They drafted Jonathan Garvin in the 7th round. There's not really anyone on the front line that you're like, oh, okay. But they do have the Smith brothers, Preston Smith, Zadarius Smith. They're not really brothers. Oren Burks as a possibility at middle linebacker, but they bring in Christian Kirksey from the Browns at middle linebacker. A team that actually has better linebackers than down linemen. But that's new for these division previews, James.
Absolutely, but where they failed the previous season was pass rushing. They couldn't generate anything, which is why they brought in Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith. And while they did get after the quarterback last year, they still got gashed in the running game. Not to mention the secondary is not worth mentioning. I mean, a year ago, they acquired Adrian Amos from the Chicago Bears, and he has not panned out well after one season in Green Bay. Darnell Savage is young as the other safety. Alexander and King, Sullivan and Jackson are your corners. And look, when the wide receivers for the Philadelphia Eagles, who I believe is still one of the worst units in the NFL last year, even after all the injuries, can pretty much accumulate 100-plus yards receiving as a unit against the secondary, I don't have much hope in them. It's why this team was pretty much in quite a few shootouts and why this defensive unit gave up 20 points a game. Once teams realized the weakness of this defense, they pretty much attacked the crap out of it. And that NFC Championship game, play action was their detriment because they couldn't stop the run. So it didn't matter what they did. They make the reads easy for the opposition, that when the opposing offense is getting a groove as far as running the ball, they're just watching the safety, making the calls at the line. Okay, here we go. Here comes eight man in the box, play action, because everyone's going to react. And, you get the Smith brothers upfield, they're out of the play, whether it's a screen, dump off to somebody, and it's always 10 to 20 yards because, schematically, this defense needs work.
The other stalwart of the Green Bay Packers is your third phase of football, special teams. Mason Crosby still kicking field goals for the Green Bay Packers. So, if they want to kick field goals, they should be okay.
Out in the youth there.
That brings us to the number one team in this division. And frankly, I think they just win it by default. It's not really that I have a whole bunch of confidence in the Vikings. But, by the way, lock win for the Packers week 10 home versus the Jaguars, but no other locks for the Packers in their 9-7 season.
Yeah.
So the Vikings win the NFC North by default with a record of 10-6, and their lone lock is week 13, which is the first week of December, home versus the Jaguars. But I don't know. I don't even really know where to start with the Vikings. They have a fallout with Stephon Diggs, but they do draft Justin Jefferson, very talented rookie.
Hey, I thought we weren't going to twist that knife in my back today.
In the first round to replace him. They also get KJ Osborne in the 5th round. Tajay Sharp gets added from Tennessee. Not sure that really adds all that much. And Adam Thielen is still with this particular team. Dalvin Cook is definitely up there when you're talking about one of the top running backs in the league. It's obviously a health question.
And it's a money question because he's holding out.
Well, there's also that too. Right. Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. are a great 1-2 punch at the tight end position. And your offensive line starts strong on the left side, gets a little weak on the right. Riley Reif at left tackle, Pat Elflein at left guard, Garrett Bradbury at center, Dakota Dozer at right guard, and Brian O'Neill as your right tackle. Ezra Cleveland was drafted in the 2nd round. Perhaps he can he's currently listed as the backup at left tackle for Riley Reif, depending on if they make a move or maybe they can have him play at right tackle and shift to left tackle when they move on from Riley Reif. Who knows? I have a feeling Ezra Cleveland is getting onto this offensive line in some particular fashion. I say all that so that I could leave you to rant about Kirk Cousins.
Oh, no. I'm just surprised he's still free walking the streets after committing grand theft larceny for the 2nd time against the same team. Fool me once, shame on me, and fool me twice. My fault all around. The fact that this guy can pretty much get away with the most average subpar play I've seen in my entire life at this position is just mind-boggling. And I can't say he's getting by on talent because he's not that great of a quarterback. He proved that in Washington, and last year's success had nothing to do with him. It was on this defense and Dalvin Cook. Everything that he was able to do in the passing game was predicated off play action. By the way, his receivers don't like him. I think that's part of the reason why Diggs is in Buffalo instead of Minnesota, because he was complaining about
Thielen likes him. Thielen likes him. No?
Thielen, I'm trying to remember what game it was last season, but there was a game in which the cameras clearly caught Thielen and Cousins in each other's face because Thielen's like, dude, I was open. Why didn't you throw the ball? To which Cousins replied, and you just alluded to it, I was on my back. I couldn't throw it. They were in my face. And you could clearly see that those words coming. I mean, Mike's probably got the sound, if you hit, Turning Point or Boom Mics or whatever, some hometown video in Minnesota, but you could clearly see those, by reading their lips, those are the words coming out of their mouth. And Thielen wasn't happy early on in the season until he got his contract, re-upped before week 6. And then he basically shut his mouth and did everything. But I'm pretty sure it was one of those early games before that contract extension. And they clearly showed the play. The offensive line disintegrated at the snap. Kirk Cousins had no option. He basically threw a lame duck out of bounds in the direction of Thielen. And Thielen, to his credit, there was not a single defender within 10 yards of him. And so, because he didn't see what happened to the offensive line, he goes back and he's yelling at Kurt like, what the hell was that? So, no, I don't think the receivers like Kirk Cousins.
So I think the loss of Stephon Diggs here is probably going to be one of the biggest things that they're going to have to overcome, even with the rookie that they drafted to try and fill that void.
Justin Jefferson should be an Eagle.
On the defensive side of the ball, I mean, there are pieces, but I don't know if they have enough pieces, right? So you have Danielle Hunter at defensive end, Michael Pierce at nose tackle, but then it's Shamar Stephan and Iafede Odinbayo. I totally killed Iafede's last name.
You did.
Anthony Zettel in the mix there. Just sort of, okay. That's how I feel about them. It's like, okay.
Yarborough and Johnson figure into the mix.
Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks at linebacker, but then it's Eric Wilson, Ben Gideon. Okay. Just like, sure, you got me excited and then sort of, you let me down. At safety, Harrison Smith, one of the best. Anthony Harris at free safety. That's great. But now your corners are Mike Hughes and your first-round draft choice, Jeff Gladney, and third-round draft choice, Cameron Dantzler. Okay. Everything about the Vikings defense is okay.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Remember, their head coach Zimmer is a defensive specialist. Zimmerman, excuse me. If nothing else, they're always coached and schemed well on defense. So the talent may look but this typically tends to be one of your top 10 defenses year in and year out. I'm still baffled at the fact that despite getting blown out in the NFC Championship game a few years ago, this team has struggled to bounce back because they felt they could upgrade at quarterback. And I still feel that if they had just brought back Case Keenum and did exactly what they did that season, and granted they did catch a break because in the first matchup against the Packers that season, they injured Aaron Rodgers and knocked him out for the year. If they just scheme and keep playing that way and they brought back Case Keenum, I honestly think they would have been in the Super Bowl by now. They definitely would have been in one of the last two. I don't think we see the Rams last year, or possibly not even the Niners this past season. And yeah, call me crazy, but they had something going. And to think that, okay, if we just upgrade at quarterback, well, you upgraded at quarterback to the detriment of your roster because you have so much money tied up in Cousins now. You had to sacrifice other pieces. And yeah, I joke about Stephon Diggs, but that was a money thing because of how much he was making. You can't keep everyone when you pay your quarterback that much. And remember, that first contract Cousins signed, all 80 plus, $83 million for 3 years was the initial contract. All of that was fully guaranteed. So, I mean, this team is heavily invested in the wrong player. And I will continue to say that as long as it's Kirk Cousins.
So the way that I have the NFC North playing out this season, the Vikings go 10-3 after week 13.
Okay.
And then they send a big thank you to the Chicago Bears because their last 4 games of the season, I have them going 1-3, losing at the Bucks, beating the Bears at home, losing at the Saints, and then losing at the Lions. So why do I say they say thank you to the Bears? Because, as we mentioned before with the Packers after week 13, I have them at 6-6, and then pulling off 3 straight victories at Lions, home Panthers, home Titans, and then losing to the Bears in week 17 to prevent them from tying with the Vikings and getting the lone playoff spot out of this particular division.
Nah. Well, I mean, if that's the way you see it playing out, then no, the Packers don't lose to the Bears at the end of the season.
Probably not, but that's the story that I have told with my game-by-game predictions that I didn't even realize I had told until just now when I really looked at it and started analyzing exactly what I have on paper here. But as I see it, the Vikings win the division. They're the lone playoff spot at 10-6. Packers miss the playoffs at 9-7 thanks to a loss to the Bears in week 17. The Bears finish at 6-10. Lions finish 5-11. Listen, we know it's not going to play out this way. If it does, I am Nostradamus. This is the 6th year we've done this. None of them have ever played. I mean, I've been close. I've been close, and there have been teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars from a few years ago that I was super spot on with. But there are plenty of teams that I was super wrong about as well. The Cleveland Browns last season would be that team.
Oh, gosh, who wasn't?
So, yeah, that's how I see the NFC North. If you disagree or agree, send us an email, nextfanup@gmail.com. We love hearing both perspectives. That's the whole idea of this podcast. We have 32-ish super fans to provide you as many different perspectives on your favorite team as we possibly can, because the homer perspective is way different than the rival perspective and is way different than the guy who has no skin in the game's perspective.
I'm the guy with no skin in the game.
except for Justin Jefferson.
Oh gosh, he should be an eagle. He should be an eagle.
At NFU Podcast to tweet us, facebook.com/NFU Podcast to keep the conversation going. If this is the first time you're listening to us, hey, thanks. Make sure you subscribe or follow the show wherever great podcasts are heard. And hey, tell a friend about us. Wouldn't hurt. There's nothing here that we're giving away. Like there's no information that's, proprietary. It's not like, we're giving you away fantasy. We do give fantasy advice, but it's not like, you can't tell your friends the fantasy advice that we're sharing with you. None at all. Tell a friend, listen to us, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora. We're huge on Pandora. We love Pandora. But anywhere great podcasts are heard, you can find us. And for the NFC North, there you have it.
How you doing? How are you, buddy? Trying to figure out who's going to play?
Yeah.
So are we.